Hi, everyone. My name is Joseph Carson, and I'm the Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO here at Delinea. Delinea is a company that helps organizations discover, secure, and protect the privileged accounts in their organization to make sure they make it as difficult as possible for cyber criminals to be successful. And today's session is really all about the risks of identity-based cyber attacks and also the best practices to securing credentials and privilege access. So I'm going to take you through some of the risks, but I'm also going to take you through the journey and how you can, get to a point where you can have your privileged accounts successfully discovered and protected. So let's go ahead and take you through that journey, and hopefully this will be educational and very valuable for you. The first thing is, for many organizations, most cyber attacks target privileged accounts. And there's a main reason for that is because when they get access to privileges, it allows them to move around the network freely, to laterally move, and to gain access to the sensitive areas of the business. And when they gain that access, it enables to deploy ransomware, malicious malware, steal credentials, or exfiltrate data. And this is ultimately what their main motive is, to make ultimately money out of victims. So for organizations, the challenge is that many organizations still assume when they think about privileges, they sometimes think about the administrators in the organization. They think about the people. They think about the security team who might have access to doing vulnerability scans or to finding where systems are unpatched or doing data loss prevention. They think about the help desk workers who are doing break fix scenarios, making sure the applications and making sure users are getting, their machines repaired or maintained and making sure everything's working. And then there's also those third-party vendors who need to access the applications or the systems that they're responsible for, that the organization has outsourced, or maybe they're managing the firewalls, or maybe they're managing different types of, maybe it's a managed security service provider as well. So a lot of organizations, sometimes that's where they kind of focus when they think about privileges, but it's so more than that. Organizations just went to where a lot of privileges work behind the scenes. They are things like application accounts. They're APIs that basically make sure that cloud infrastructure is communicating, that data has been backed up, that systems have access to sensitive data and databases, that APIs and applications can communicate easily. It's robotic process automation. It's service accounts. A lot of these are running in the background, sometimes behind the scenes, and sometimes with very high privileges for those accounts. And attackers know that. And a lot of those accounts tend to go unmanaged, unprotected, and sometimes have the same security configuration that they had many years ago when they were first implemented or deployed. And these are really sensitive accounts, and attackers also go after that. That's probably some of the most sensitive accounts that attackers have been going after in the last couple of years, especially organizations heavily using those in the cloud environments. And then you also have the internal, external business users or third-party access that has access to sensitive data. And this is another area where attackers go after, because they really want to make sure they can impact that data as much as possible, because that's the data that the business is vital in order for its operations and services to provide. So these are some of the things that attackers look for. And ultimately, in my view, we have to consider that almost all identities are privileged. But it's not to say that they all have equal risk, that all accounts, they might be privileged, but they come with different risks. And whatever attackers gain access, they can have different impacts to the business when compromised. When privileged accounts go unmanaged, go unprotected, what happens to the business is ultimately, the reality check is that we end up seeing data breaches. We end up seeing ransomware, causing destruction and catastrophic impacts to many businesses around the world, where the business comes to complete standstill. And we've seen that even recently with the likes of MGM Resort and also the Caesars Casino. We also see a lot of business email compromise, such as financial fraud happening, where attackers are really looking to overtake and compromise accounts or do digital identity theft in order to make those successful. We also see a lot of insider risks. And a lot of insider risks is not intentional. Most of them are accidental, employees wanting to get the job done. But when they're actually having, overprivileged users, they sometimes basically take risks that can easily be leveraged by attackers. Malware getting in and exfiltrating data and creating backdoors or stealing credentials. And all of this can result in some type of revenue or brand damage. It can result in data poisoning to the environment or compliance failure. Or the service and application that's essential to the business can be down. Therefore, the business is no longer providing services. So what things can you do? What can we do in order to reduce the risk? And this is how privileged access management comes in. It's an important pillar, especially it's a very important part of a security strategy and program that organizations can really reduce those types of risks down as much as possible, making it as difficult for attackers to be successful. And that's ultimately, we want to make, we want to cause them to take more risks, ultimately creating more noise in the network. So one of the first steps that I highly recommend is getting into a strong definition of what privileged access management means to your business. Many organizations have different needs and different services that they're providing, but it's important to make sure that you understand what privilege means to your business. And this means understanding what human privilege accounts are, the ones that are interacted with people, understanding the machine accounts, as I mentioned, a lot of those APIs or even within code or automation and service accounts, those the accounts basically running behind the scenes, understanding about those types of accounts. Are they tied to hardware specifically? Is it a network device? Is it a hardware firewall? Is it some type of storage device or a backup? Is it software? Is it virtual machines, containers? Is it in code, etc.? Is it on-premise in your traditional network, or is it stored in the cloud? Really getting an understanding about the location or proximity of those accounts. Who interacts with them? Is it internal, employees or systems, or is it external to the business? Do they need to be public facing? Do they need to have remote access? What additional security controls do you have in place? How often are they used? What's the frequency? Do you have maybe business hours that can be applied to those accounts' usage? So it allows you to track normal usage and also highlight potential abuse of those privileges as well. Is it specific to a location? Can you do some type of proximity-based or geographical tagging of those privileges? Is it tied to a specific department? Then understanding the sensitivity of the application or the data that's been accessed from that particular privilege account and application. And make sure you have some type of accountability, which is a service owner or system owner that's tied to those privileges. And this gets into, it's very good in the early phase to do that separation of machines versus human, because how we interact with those types of privileges are very different. For example, humans tend to need to type them in or gain access to them, which means that, yes, we have to make sure that that process is seamless. And moving to things where we have single sign-on or moving passwords more into the background and leveraging things like biometrics or facial recognition or even MFA in order to make it as seamless, or even passkeys to really make that human experience much more better. But in the background, we have a lot of the machine identities, and those passwords can be as complex as possible, they can be as long as possible, and they can be rotated after usage. So separating the policy very early in this process is a good step in order to make sure that you're being able to put the right security controls that makes it as difficult as possible for attackers to be successful. And this gets into, I highly recommend doing a classification register, or what I refer to as a risk register. As I mentioned earlier, that all privileges, all identities are some type of privileges, but we can separate those by different risk associations. By applying this risks in the more higher risk accounts, we can make sure that more security controls are applied to protect them, whether it being four eyes approach or access workflows, or that you need to have certain security controls need to be satisfied in order to gain access to those. Or tying it to compliance. A lot of compliance has maps to things like multi-factor authentication, recording the sessions, having specific access brokers in order to jump into or kind of leverage into other systems. So tying it to compliance, or maybe one-time passwords is something that you want to be able to do. And then, of course, there is accounts out there that still a password is perfectly fine, whether it being low sensitive accounts or things like your social media or PR access and so forth. There is accounts where passwords are certainly fine to protect those, because even if they're compromised, it doesn't cause any impact to the business. So I highly recommend having a classification technique or a risk register for the business. This gets into, it's a continuous process. It's not something you simply check as done. It's something that you continually do. And this is why it's important to apply the privilege access management lifecycle to your PAM journey and PAM project. This means, with that strong definition that we already talked about earlier, but getting into automated discovery of privileges, finding where they are in the environment as new systems or new applications are being deployed or new employees are being enrolled in the organization, making sure you're able to discover those and put the right controls in place. And that means you want to manage and secure those privilege access and privilege accounts. Monitoring the usage, getting into things like session recording and session launching, having good auditability, so you can really determine, are they operating with normal business operations. Alerting on potential abuse, being able to detect these privileges are being used at 2 a.m. in the morning from a location where we don't have an office or employees. Maybe we should investigate. Maybe we should look into those to find out maybe it's an abuse of those privileges. Having strong integration into your incident response plan and response process, And then have this continuous, have a cycle where you audit, you review, and you update the security controls on a continuous basis. And I highly recommend getting into where it's all about making sure that what I refer to as the privilege access management matrix. This is helping you find where the starting point should be, where you should basically, think about what is it you want to achieve for the business outcomes, how you want to achieve business value. So really the PAM matrix is to help you decide, what is the highest risk areas you want to address first, and then doing it in a phased approach or applying it to the PAM maturity model. So really understanding is maybe you want to reduce the risk against ransomware. Maybe your privileged accounts that you have today only have passwords that's protecting them, and they've been used by the IT administrators and security team, and they're typically done for configuration changes or maintenance or upgrades. And you want to apply multi-factor authentication, for example. This allows you to basically map out and ask the right questions about how you can actually apply better security controls, ultimately to reduce that risk. So the PAM matrix is something of an interactive tool that you can leverage in order to help you map your journey to success and make sure that you progress over time, and you can see how you're progressing. You can see basically the more security controls, the better auditability, the better integration, and the more the risk you're reducing when you report back to the business. So this is a very, very important tool. So thinking about this in a practical way, I refer to it as sometimes classifying trust dynamically, getting to where we have security being adaptive and context-based. But when I think about security, it should be like a living organism within the business, that when the threats are high, the security can adapt and actually put more controls in place. Or when the threats are low, it could be, more easier to use and less friction being caused. So I like to think of this more dynamic, kind of adaptive security environment. So it really gets into when certain identities need to have access to systems or databases or resources within the infrastructure. And that could be basically user needing access. It could be a system or a device. It could be code, tokens embedded within the code, or it can be APIs that need to have access using basically shared keys. And this means rather than those identities having direct access to the sensitive systems, you basically put it through a privileged access management solution, moving those privileges behind the scenes, making sure they're being controlled and audited, monitored, and even rotated after usage. And this means one of the first things you want to do is make sure you build a trust level. And this might be one that is accessing the vault. It might require multi-factor authentication. And before you get access, once you've verified who you are, that you are a trusted, authenticated, authorized user, then you'll get access to those systems that you've got entitlement and privileges to do so. That's assigned to your role and scope that you've got. This becomes essential to making sure that you're only able to access the things you should be entitled to. And this is the separation of authentication versus authorization. So authentication is really where you're doing that, the identity validation, making sure you basically go through the identity provider. And then the authorization is really around that privileged access management entitlement. Now, of course, you might need access to more sensitive systems, whether it being databases or whether it being, health data, or it could be sensitive applications. It could be your security solutions like your SIEM or your firewall, something that you want to make sure that has been heavily guarded. And ultimately, if you need to have access, then you can go through additional security controls, making sure you do maybe biometrics to re-verify your identity. Maybe it requires one of your colleagues to authorize and approve your access. Maybe it's session recording to record your activity that during those actions you're taking. Applying analytics to understand about, is this operating within normal behaviors? And then ultimately having that relate to a risk score. And has that risk been minimized enough in order to reduce and allow this access to occur? And if those are all satisfied and basically meet, a lot of them could be behind the scenes. And this is really where when we talk about zero trust, we really need to move also to zero frictions, or sometimes I even refer to it as zero assumptions. Zero assumptions is don't assume that security has already been satisfied. Make sure you verify and validate and continuously verify. And you want to get to zero friction. Well, you want to make security usable. Zero trust is the baseline starting point, but you should have the business goals in mind when you're doing this. So this is something I refer to, the classifying trust dynamically and getting security where it's almost like a living organism. And if along comes an attacker, ultimately that user will get access to the database. And you also apply this to your cloud infrastructure as well. And privileged access management can be deployed on-premise or cloud as a service. And along comes an attacker, and if they ever do compromise that initial identity, it means that yes, they can access that code, they can access that user, that system, that compromised system. But what we've done is we've prevented the lateral move. We've prevented that attacker from being able to get onto more sensitive systems, really isolating the attacker's ability to basically freely move around. And also, when they detect these types of controls in place, the attackers tend to take more risk. And ultimately, when they take more risk, they create more noise in the environment, giving the defenders like you a better chance at detecting them at an early stage. And this is really where I think, in my journey for doing this for many years, I would love organizations to really get to zero persistent privileges. This is where we sometimes refer to it as least standard privileges or the principle of least privilege, which is all making sure that we're not giving users too much and we're giving them enough to do their job and enabling to be able to be successful and meet their goals. And this is where really zero persistent privileges really gets to where it's privileges on demand, just in time at the right time, with the right controls in place, minimizing the risk as much as possible. And sometimes I like to think of it, it's almost like, when I think about it in a real world physical scenario, I like to think of it as a continuous digital polygraph test, where it's asking the right questions based on the type of access or where that access is coming from, what controls has been satisfied. And it's really asking those right questions to make sure that, yes, this is an authorized authenticator request before it gets accessed. And then, of course, if you ask those questions that, all of a sudden the responses or answers are suspicious, you can investigate or minimize the ability for that, that authentication to be successful, or require more stringent security controls where you get into those adaptive approaches. So for me, it's almost like a digital polygraph test to make sure that you really, ask the tough questions to make sure that only the right people are gaining access. And this gets into, why privileged access is important. Why should it be a top security strategy for organizations' security programs? Because it's more than just security. When you think about privileged access management, why is it a top priority and why is it good for everyone? Because when we think about it, we talk about what's value. Sometimes people talk about it's gold or it's data, it's oil. But actually, it's more than that. The most valuable asset that we have on this earth and the world and even beyond is time. Your time is the most valuable thing. And we all have a certain amount of time. And the more we make the best choices and the best use of that time is value. So one of the things that privileged access management can do, it has a strong return on investment for the business. It can reduce a lot of wasted time choosing your next password, time resetting your access, time resetting your password, time gaining access and getting locked out and having to go help desk and call and troubleshoot issues. This really makes it more seamless. It makes it much more trusted users getting access, but it reduces wasted time. And for me, I think that's one of the most valuable things we can give to employees is more time back. It's also a positive experience. Who here loves passwords? Who here enjoys choosing passwords? Let's think about the employees and let's try to move passwords into the background. And a privileged access management solution helps you move passwords into the background. In that case, it's a win for the CISO. They can go to the board and they can show that they're making employees happy. Security that makes happy employees, and also having a return on investment that's actually making the business more profitable, more value. It's also a fast track for those who are going down the path of compliance or trying to become insured through cyber insurance. It can also help you recover quickly when you understand what concept compromise and how to rotate and lock those accounts out from malicious use. It can help you quickly recover from cyber attacks. And yes, like other solutions, it does make the cyber criminal's job more difficult by actually making it challenging for them to be able to laterally move and gain access to more sensitive areas. Ultimately, it's a path to making the business more resilient to cyber threats. And this is ultimately what we're looking to achieve, is build business resiliency, making sure the business can survive, continue, and handle the cyber attacks that target them on a daily basis. So how can Delinea help you? What's some of the things that we actually have that can actually help you on this journey? We have lots of educational material, lots of things that can really help you in this journey, such as our series of privileged access management, privileged access cloud security, zero trust privilege, our definitive guides, really giving you the knowledge to make sure that you basically can make your journey to privileged access management success a great one, and one that's valuable, and one that basically can help you get more time back. And also getting into eliminating weak and default credentials, which is a major problem and one area that attackers always take advantage of. And we have a solution called Secret Server that can help you manage those credentials and make sure they're rotated with strong, complex passwords that is very difficult to crack. Then getting into making sure you're able to manage the usage and the security controls applied to those with Secret Server and account lifecycle management. Getting into removing overprivileged users and applying is the principle of least privilege and the zero trust strategy and framework. We have solutions, which is our server suite and cloud suite, to really help you move to that just-in-time privilege elevation. being able to manage application privileges using our privilege manager, and then ultimately bringing it all together with that visibility and knowledge and intelligence is our privilege usage visibility with behavior analytics. So very strong solutions that really can help you manage and protect the privileges in your environment. And another guide that I have that created to help you on this journey to make it a successful one is our privilege access management checklist. This is really where you can go through and think about your journey that you're going to go on and how to make sure you can map it out to one that makes it most best practice for your business and making sure you have the best success where possible. So if you want to get started with privilege access management, download the checklist and make your journey to PAM a successful one, and one that makes the world, ultimately your business, your environment, and all of us a safer place. So my name is Joseph Carson, and I'm the Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO from Delinea. And I hope you find this very informative, very valuable, educational, and stay safe and take care, and all the best.